Sporch. Melb Frib. It's not telling me the thing yet, so I gotta keep on vamping and making odd noises. And okay, here we go. So, say words, would you?
All right. Well, hey, I'm Andy Evans.
All
Grew up
right.
in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, up in the frozen swamplands, and I've been in Michigan resident my whole life. Going on 56 years now. I've been here on the planet here in Michigan, and long time Republican voter till around 2016, and I started thinking a whole lot about the kind of people that were being put up for office and the huge amounts of money that were flowing to these people. And it really started making me question everything. I mean, literally everything. And then, of course, I had been familiar with some libertarian thought, anarchist thought of the past. And when Gary Johnson made his run for president, I was certainly attracted to some of his ideas, and I got to start learning a little bit more about the libertarian side of things. And of course, since then, I've met a whole lot of different libertarians, far left, far right, minarchist, anarchist, classical liberal. I'm probably a little closer to the classical liberal, but I've been trying to keep my mind open to some of the new streams of thought out there, and maybe some not so new streams of thought out there.
Yeah. So, we've followed a similar trajectory. I don't know how much you've seen of my origin story, anime villain style. But the general vibe that it's similar. I was a Bush supporting Republican in high school, and I liked the idea of glassing the Middle East and putting automated turrets on the border so that we could keep the criminals out. I wasn't too big a fan of the blacks and a variety of shit like that. It was one of them thar things, and yeah, the vibe shifted because I started to realize how much I was basically just trying to fucking impress my dad and shit, and the church locally and all this, and so I started to move away from what basically amounted to fascism, and like my mother was there at the right time with a suggestion, because I was I was about to turn 18, and I was like, I don't want to vote Democrat or Republican. Neither of these really represent me. And she's like, well, have you heard about the Libertarians? And I had not. And now she staunchly denies any connection, even though she'll definitely admit that that was the case. But she doesn't like how extreme I've gotten. I'll say that. The general idea is, yeah, similar vibes. Though I spent a very limited amount of time on the Gary Johnson side of things and started to really lean into the Ron Paul end of things. And, like, that lasted an embarrassing amount of time because the thing about Ron Paul is he had a lot of good things to say. I still recommend, Liberty Defined to people who want to find out some interesting shit.
Great book.
Yeah. And, but it's it's one of those things where there's enough also attached that I can't currently really recommend, that to the extent that I'd like to. And the general vibe that I want to go off of is, in the present day, is I want complete unity of anarchists, of all stripes, and I want libertarians who are less anarchist to become more anarchist. So that's been my mission. I don't know, I don't know how specifically familiar you are with anarchist theory of libertarianism. Especially the earlier sort of Bakunin section of or Desjacques or Kropotkin, Proudhon, all these original leftist thinkers, or are you more the modern American tradition of libertarian?
Yeah, I would fall, I guess, more into the latter. I've certainly looked into some of the anarchists, certainly Emma Goldman, folks like that.
Awesome.
That certainly come a little more from the left side of things, and of course, I've looked at things like Marxism, and I've always thought, well, man, how can you get Marxism to work when people are at their, the nature of people is they're so damn self-centered and greedy. How can you get a pure Marxist system in place without some form of government aggression forcing the matter? And of course, Emma Goldman wrote My Disillusionment in Russia, where she went to see the big revolution that was going on in 1917, and she found that basically the vacuum of power had simply been replaced by a new set of elites, the Leninists, etc. And so I guess at least my initial looks at anarchy have been kind of depressing.
Yes.
To see, you try to maybe get the people to run things a little more and to restore a little more power away from the elites, and then you just get a fresh set of elites bolts right into the picture.
Yeah, though at the same time, to be like fair and balanced, TMCR, fucking like that's always gonna be the case. Like, it, even if anarchy fails like forever, you're gonna get a power vacuum, or like a smaller power vacuum, or something, or something, or something. The march of the state has never really reduced the power of the size or the power of the state. It's always just sort of like moved things around. Like the difference. So Emma Goldman wrote a great essay called "There Is No Communism in Russia," where she detailed the fact that the Bolsheviks basically had institutional and inherent flaws and errors in their way of thinking. The fact is that they were like, they were trying to do what Mikhail Bakunin would call wielding the people's stick. And he said when the people are being beaten, they don't much care whether or not it's the people's stick that is beating them. And it's like, if you try for a dictatorship of the proletariat, it'll probably just turn into a dictatorship. So, like, that's what he was warning against, is that dictatorship, like, just remaining a dictatorship, and, there's no actual benefit, and you're not actually getting an anarchist society. So Marx kicked him out of the Union. Um, and, that sort of cemented that divide. It sort of started to cement the divide between people who thought you could use the state to reform the state, and the people who said just smash the state and get it over with.
Yeah, and then of course along that vein too, I've long held the thought that if we can have as minimal a government as possible, and not worry so much about what economic systems then evolve from it, because there are certainly some socialist systems that work perfectly well. Where I grew up, we had farm cooperatives where you would raise your crops or whatever. You'd basically send them into the co-op, and you'd earn shares in the co-op, and you could then use those shares at the local co-op grocery stores or other stores they had in operation, and you could actually do quite a bit without even touching government currency, just working off the shares in that co-op, and it seemed like a very efficient way to go, actually.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of like, in a more modern sense, you've got things like Konkin, like Samuel Edward Konkin III, and agorism, and the mentality that you've got, an oppressive state and its mega corporate banking / whatever arms, right? And then you're going to try to reduce their power by simply refusing to cooperate. If enough people did that, then the system would have no lifeblood, and it would have to collapse. There's a problem with that. Most people aren't gonna fucking do that, and so you end up with it's a very good idea, and you can use agorist principles anyway, even if it doesn't fucking work. But there's always that's what I try. You know, I try to get all of these people on the same page. And one of the first, it's the hardest sell. It's like, yeah, this stuff has historically worked very poorly, and been mismanaged extremely and resulted in a significant amount of loss for all involved. Hey, do you want to sign up? Um,
Right, right on.
so it's one of those things. It's like you gotta start by managing realistic expectations. But like, okay, so let me ask you, um, your ideal minarchist society, how's that looking?
So, I guess if I were looking at just a straight minarchist system, very minimal government, very decentralized government, I haven't quite figured out a way to replace courts and police yet.
Mm.
I'm just about there on everything else, but I think some minimal way of protecting people's property rights and basic human rights is pretty much where I'm at this point. And I do have some concern about shared resources, things like air and water, groundwater, trying to come up with a way to make sure that's not getting, mucked up beyond recognition by irresponsible parties. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Well, so what do you think the ideal courts and police system would look like? And what do you mean? What's the extent you have of like protection of people and property?
Right. So obviously, I think there's far too many laws in the books right now. I mean, there's in the federal code. I think I saw the other day it was up to 60,000 pages of outlandish amount of
Mm-hmm.
laws. So certainly, I think at least some laws in terms of protecting people from physical harm, violent crimes. Direct theft, things of that nature. But otherwise, I would have definitely a very free market, privatized approach, really to as many matters as possible. People should be able to, sue each other for whatever they have to sue each other for, and only the very worst of crimes, I think, should actually be getting into any kind of a criminal system. I think we're putting, just hundreds of thousands of people in jail for no legitimate fucking reason whatsoever in this day and age, especially for just things like drug possession. I
Right.
mean, give me a break. What does that solve? Those people are that doesn't help solve their drug problem. It does nothing but put them in a cage. So I certainly have an issue with that.
Yeah, and of course, like recently, they basically fully criminalized being homeless by allowing state or city governments to criminalize camping in their bounds, which basically means that um, if you're homeless, you can't like try to reestablish yourself in the city. You can't like get any resources you need. You have to basically just go fuck off out of the city, or they'll arrest you.
Oh, that's a classic example of government creating a problem in the first place through
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous zoning laws, and then creating this homeless population because you won't let them build a tiny home. You won't let them,
Exactly.
with some other form of housing that at least they'd have a damn roof over their head. And now it's like, oh, you're homeless. Well, let's go after you some more. Since we've made you homeless, let's see what we can come up with next. It just it snowballs, and you just keep adding layer upon layer of more regulations and more government authority, and yeah, it just seems to be just an endless cycle of that.
Well, so in that regard, let me ask: do you really think so? This situation, right? I think we can both agree that a key driving force behind these decisions being made is prison labor, and the fact that the system relies on forced labor, um, even in the modern day. Like the 13th Amendment didn't fucking abolish shit. What it did is it meant that you had to be a criminal in order to be a slave. So that meant that the prison and intelligence industrial complex had to crop up, and the insidious thing about that is because you have to be a criminal, they can frame the people in the system as criminals, even if the reason they're behind bars or whatever is because of some frivolous fucking bullshit that they put up, that they just made up, you know? And so let me ask: do you think that the founders of this country were minarchists? Do you think this country started out with a small government? If the primary mode of this country's economic expansion was the same kind of forced labor?
Yeah, so back then, of course, we had a very agrarian society, and when you have an agrarian society, there is a lot more opportunity for you to own your means of production. Unfortunately, a lot of the founding fathers owned slaves themselves.
Right.
So, yeah, there was some duality going on there for certain. But certainly the concepts they put forward generally seem to be, at least a classical liberal concept, if not a minarchist concept. I mean, they at least had thrown off the King of England, which was a great start. But there were still a lot of inherent flaws in that system that time, of course, dealt with in some very harsh ways, as we learned through the rest of our history, our recent history.
Right, yeah. Well, but that's my question. Like, one of the things that I've brought up before that really pisses off right-wingers, especially fucking people who identify, not you, I'm not saying you, but people who identify as classical liberals are oftentimes just liberals that don't want dad to know they're liberals. And one of the things that I've said to them that really sticks in their craw is the government has never been small in America, because the institutions that built this country were things like slavery and imperial expansionism and that sort of thing. And
Right.
both of those require the absolute subjugation of one or more classes of people so that they can form the basis for the imperial expansion. And so they did slavery, they did indentured servitude, which is slavery. They, as soon as they got rid of their tax rebellion, they started to tax people and crush rebellions. Um, you know, they've always needed to milk people. They've always treated us like cattle. They've always had this giant expansionist state. And to me, there really never was a minarchist utopia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I actually did a paper back in school on the Whiskey Rebellion, so quite familiar with how that went down. And of course, the way the United States expanded its territory, of course, a large expansion was Louisiana Purchase. Of course, the French, Spanish, etc., had maybe done some of the dirty work for us already there in terms of conquest of those lands before they went and sold them to the United States. But then, of course, we certainly have a terrible track record with the relocation of Native Americans out of Florida, for example, Trail of Tears, what happened in western states, some of the just god-awful treaties that were done throughout the Great Lakes region as well, where you just had this massive turnover of land with really little or no compensation to the folks that surrendered those lands. So, yeah, I mean, there's certainly been no lack of large government actions on the part of the United States of America. So there's a lot of tradition that we would have to certainly reverse folks thinking, or at least get folks thinking about what's gone on in history,
Right.
the wrongs that have been done. What can we do to, prevent from having all these gigantic empires in the future? How can we get things back to, ideally we just have just thousands of these city states. We wouldn't have these massive nations and massive empires, because anytime you have empire building, that's naturally going to require some sort of fascist regime running things, maintaining that strong military, recruiting soldiers. I mean, those are all big government sort of actions.
Yeah.
So to try to, it's not an easy trend to reverse because of the fact you have now the Chinese empire developing, you have the Russian empire, you have the European empire, Africa at some point will certainly move more into the forefront of things. So yeah, there's just the trend continues to be centralization of power. You have the World Economic Forum. There's just all these pressures to submit to some higher authority. So it's become a tall order, and the amount of dollars behind some of these people is just astonishing. But you just see one racket after another develop. The correctional facilities, that's a racket. The military-industrial complex, that's the biggest racket in world history.
Well, and
Yeah,
now military
and
and intelligence
money,
industrial.
it's astonishing. Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
So,
now when you...
I was just saying, yes, it's a very high-powered institutions allied against the people's individual freedoms. Absolutely, and there is a long history of that. I mean, pretty much our entire world history is one of empire building and conquest.
Mm-hmm. So the question that I have is, the primary question is, given the fact that the U.S. government was never really small, you would agree that the statement, and like, it's always relied on corruption, always relied on grift, always relied on spreading of empire and crushing rebellions and silencing minorities and shit like that. You would agree that the slogan MAGA is laughable because America was never really great.
Well, the thing is, in terms of how you define the word great, to some people, they view it as, hey, we've got the military power, we're the heavyweight champion of the world, nobody can mess with us. And people like to take pride in that. Nationalism is a powerful thing. It's very easy to get sucked into that mode of wanting to be, joined together for the fight against evil, whatever that perceived evil or created evil is out there. And of course, when you have a very powerful media channels that you can work through to promote such messaging, it becomes a very powerful thought, and people we're susceptible to that. We are social animals. We like to get along. We like to become part of something greater than ourselves. So the temptation to join into any nationalist movement like that, it's a incredibly powerful thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that in mind, sort of like the other week, I caught some flack, partially from a Nazi who stalks my page, but also some other people who claim to be right libertarians. I posted this image. I shared somebody else's image because it was good. It was like an image of a slave with a whipped back saying, America was never great. Like the whip scars were in the form of America was never great. That's excellent. It says it all. It says it right there. Because it's sort of like, fucking Rage Against the Machine. Anybody who's been following them for a significant amount of time knows the line, "For you." Yeah, it's been great for you. And so the reason I'm bringing all this up, sort of my line of questioning, we started sort of reach out, have this stream on the subject of culture. And we did that because we're in a server discussing libertarian issues, to put it in a way. And that server has had, let's just say its fair share of fucking arguments involving me. I have been a fucking loud shit in there. And so fucking we started to agree on some of these things, and there were some of these things that maybe fleshing out would be useful for. So I was like, hey, yo, you want to come on? And so let me just ask you, first impressions, when you hear the word woke.
depends who's using the word, as it seems to be my experience. I think when somebody says they're woke, they tend to believe they're trying to form a more inclusive society generally. I think the average person that uses that word woke does feel they're trying to be more open to other people. They're trying to include, have a more diverse culture generally, hopefully around the world, not just here in the United States. But, I think there are people that sincerely believe that there's ways we could be more diverse, more inclusive, more tolerant of each other within a society. But I think there's also some larger organizations that have kind of jumped on that woke bandwagon, a lot of corporations looking to maybe profit just a little bit from joining into that. We saw the Bud Light experiment and a few other things out there where it's like, hey, we're going to get in on this too, because we want people to think we're cool and hip and inclusive, and we're going to make it a marketing thing out of it. So everything gets corrupted at some point by some larger organizations or some people looking to make a buck, and it's so hard to escape that, no matter how noble some intentions might be towards such a movement.
Yeah. Well, so the reason the word woke exists, are you familiar with its roots?
You can fill me in a little on that.
So, I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he wrote this article. It was like 50s, I believe, and it was called "If You're Woke, You Get It," and it was an article basically about how you can sort of sense a vibe about why things are the way things are, and that it's averse. He was a black guy, and he was like saying you can sort of sense a vibe of why things are the way they are, and if you look at it through the proper lens, you can sort of start to see, oh, these institutions are set up to preserve that sort of power that's been keeping the black man down. And if you're woke, if you're aware, if you're alert to that, you get it. And so, to me, when I think of woke, at least in its proper, context, its actual intended purpose, proverbially speaking, I think of it as like sort of a statement of like, I get the vibe of, corruption, of control, of evil that's sort of pervading all this shit. And with that in mind, you can cross-apply it to things like, sexism, even though it was originally about black people, or LGBT, or, the rights of workers, or something like that. You can sort of start to be like, yeah, I get the vibe of why this country is set up the way it is, and it's because it's always been designed to preserve its power, and if its power was gotten a certain way, most notably by the abuse and exploitation of a certain set of minorities, then it will not get rid of that abuse and exploitation so quickly, so easily. It will try to preserve it or move it around in a way or more. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I think that libertarians, on some level, want that. They want to be awake to that. They want to be aware of the kinds of things that are going on. And they largely think they are. Oh, by the way, pardon the sweat, y'all. Fucking very not okay day. And I think I just spilled some water on my shirt a little bit ago, but that's also there. Anyway, point is, yeah, the general vibe is a lot of libertarians do that. Like, a lot of libertarians will say, wake up, sheeple, or some shit like that. That was a real strong thing for a while there. And, like, they'll act like they're awake and aware, and other people aren't. And then they have the audacity to say that woke people are bad. And it's like, you're doing the same shit. And so, one of the ways that manifests is, let me just start by asking you your impressions on the Mises Caucus.
So Mises Caucus, a very attractive platform. I've found a lot of good limited government concepts in their platform. Where things have gotten more than dicey is in the execution of their plans to basically take over the Libertarian Party. I mean, they were very clear about their intent to do that. They felt that the Libertarian Party, folks like Nick Sarwark, had taken them too far to the left. And so they did want to certainly get, ratchet that back and get things more into the Ron Paul tradition. They were, of course, very aggressive. They were very successful in organizing, getting the delegates together for the big Reno reset, and got themselves into power with the National Party. Where things got a little real ugly, of course, was when it came to the individual states. And you started seeing actual splits in state parties like Pennsylvania and a few others. Of course, Michigan's an obvious one with several lawsuits in progress due to that split. So, it hasn't been pretty when it's come to trying to, actually take over the state level parties. There's been a lot more resistance there. And it's unfortunate that we are caught into the left versus right paradigm. Of course, we've also had many battles between the anarchists and minarchists over the years, and it all takes away from the fact that we have certainly a clearly defined common enemy, and that's these massive centralized governments that are just killing our economic freedom and personal freedom and turning us into a giant termite hill, basically. And so we're going to have to figure out some truces here at some point and try to get back to focusing on the true elephant in the room, in my opinion.
So,
and thinking. Oh, go ahead there. Yeah,
no.
Go ahead.
This is a you show. I talk on this channel all the time. Go for it.
Well, and earlier you had mentioned some of the beginnings of the woke movement, and I just started thinking about Timothy Leary. The tune in, drop out mantra that he often espoused. And to me, certainly you had a lot of counterculture going on in the 1960s. So maybe that was the first true batch of wokeism. And of course, folks were able to really tag them with a lot of labels like, a bunch of, dirty, hairy, drug-infested hippies. What good are they? What value do they bring to our society? So that's, so counterculture, I think, is a good thing. Because, sometimes the current culture has become so so narrow-minded and just has these very specific objectives in mind of growing the state to the detriment of the people that I like a lot of counterculture in my diet generally.
Also, of course, Tim Leary was a Fed, so did you hear about that?
Yeah, you might have to fill me in on a couple of those details.
Yeah,
to be honest.
He went to jail and became an FBI informant in order to get help.
Oh, after he went to jail, right. Yeah.
And he snitched on some far left shit because he was a bitch who didn't want to stand by his principles. Just a nice little...
Jail does a lot of things to certain people. There's no doubt about it there. And there's another long history of what governments can do to people in terms of some of the just horrible tortures. I mean, like the Pinochet regime. And if you had gotten in a bad way with Mr. Pinochet, it wasn't pretty what they would do to you. And it's understandable how people can be turned. It's just there's just no limits to what some of these authoritarian regimes will do. I mean, we certainly know what the FBI and CIA are capable of, and they've have had no qualms about getting thousands of people killed as long as they reach their objectives.
I'm pretty sure though it wasn't anything extreme like that. I think he just flipped a bitch because he was in there and he didn't want to be. But maybe there is more. If anybody, hey, if you're there to defend Tim Leary's honor, hit me up on my DMs. We'll have a conversation. Um,
Well, that brings up another point. When it comes to the federal prison system, I mean, look at the prison that Martha Stewart got to go to, for example. Did you see that little facility? It looked like a women's college.
yeah,
It looked it looked like one of those $100,000 a year women's colleges. It certainly didn't look like much of a prison to me. Now, Timothy Leary, he might have had to do a little harder time, I suspect, than Martha Stewart did.
yeah,
So
and
I'll put that into his defense column.
yeah, it's like that line from Immortal Techniques, Rich Man's World. I go to country club prison, you dumb motherfucker. Um, yeah,
If you get convicted to begin with,
yeah.
there's the whole topic in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so the reason I asked specifically about that, um, the Mises Caucus I think is a good example of people who cater to that sort of tendency. Um, the background for anybody who might be new to this channel, like if Andy shares this around, maybe there'll be some new folks. But I got removed from their groups and blocked on their social media. Not because I said anything wrong. I didn't commit libel. I didn't even break their rules. What I did do, however, was criticize Javier Milei. And they
Ooh.
fucking love Javier Milei. This foreign pro-war fucking Zionist president with a giant fucking surveillance state and a massive police industrial complex. Like, the whole government there is set up under him as a fascist output. A prime example is...
Well, that's all South Americans know, though. I mean, isn't that a fair statement? That's all they've ever known is fascism or communism.
Well, see, the thing is, there are plenty of more moderate folks between the two of those. And Javier Milei positioned himself as a libertarian alternative. I don't accept that premise if what he's going to do is the same shit that your common far-right government would do, all while, I mean, you talk about the World Economic Forum. Everybody jacked off about his speech there. They really loved that. They made memes about how it's better than sex and all this shit. Like, fucking, I do not care. Point is that, like, they were, like, really on board with that. And they were saying, oh, he stuck it to him. At the end run of it, the way he wrapped up the whole speech really cements what he was doing with that. He said, to the World Economic Forum, you are the real protagonists of this story, and Argentina is your staunch and unconditional ally. And now, he's doing shit to Argentina that would make the normal libertarian who's like all gung-ho, the past several years about not getting involved in shit, our tax money goes where, all this shit. He wants to get in NATO, which would be 2% a year. He's an Israel supporter. He backs the Vatican. He is on board with the World Economic Forum and CPAC and APAC. He supports giving Ukraine weapons. He's, he's giving the police easier power to shoot people. He's starting an AI surveillance superstate that will minority report crimes, like predict them and like say these people are going to be criminals. We'll get them first. He's doing evil shit, and the biggest thing that they have advocating for this fuck is they say, oh, but he slashed so many government organizations and he's going to get off the central bank. He's going to close the central bank. He wants to dollarize. Even if he did succeed in fully closing his country's central bank, which he couldn't even do if he wanted to dollarize, because your central bank needs to work with the Central Bank of America in order to make dollarization works, as anybody who knows how dollarization works can tell you. The ultimate shit is, he didn't. He didn't end his Fed. He didn't do shit to make the inflation go down. He, in fact, jacked up the inflation by reducing the value of the Argentinian peso against the dollar. And he said I just lowered the peg. It's like, it's now what the market rate is. Okay, sure, but your people saved up in the peso. Your people are currently paying their rent and all this shit in the peso, which means you're buying food, whatever. Which means that what that does is effectively reduces their savings, their spending power, their ability to live by half. If Biden did all the stuff I just listed, libertarians would want him redacted. Holy shit. And so I pointed this out in a video, and the Mises Caucus banned me everywhere and blocked me everywhere, and that guy sucks. I was getting along fine for a long time in there until I started to criticize their precious right fuck leaders. And to me, this is a prime example of how the people who don't like woke don't like it because it interferes with their ability to keep people asleep. I really think that, like, the Mises, especially, like, now that they've really decided to lean into being pro-Trump and lean into being anti-trans as a matter of policy, like sending out that email saying trans people are a cultural Marxist invasion or whatever that needs to be stopped. Fuck off. And
Right.
to me,
So a few thoughts.
yeah,
there,
respond as long as you
Jeremiah.
want.
Yeah. So Milei, well, he's clearly looking to get reelected. I mean, if someone wants to stay in office any length of time, they're going to have to start playing ball with the military-industrial complex of their country. They're going to have to play ball a little bit with the elected Congress of that country. And so unless you have a Congress filled with libertarians, you're definitely not going to be able to be a 100% principled libertarian in your every action. There's no doubt in my mind of that. So to really have a true libertarian movement in a country, I think it's going to require a very serious economic upset, some just horrific event where people say, hey, the government's screwing us, and we have got to come up with something better than this. So Milei has come into tradition in Argentina, where they've had all these, fascist regimes forever, and he's going to be working within that framework. I mean, yeah, he does some libertarian things, says some libertarian things, but when rubber meets road, when you're dealing with that kind of tradition, it's going to be, at the minimum, a very incremental libertarianism that gets implemented, but for you to dare oppose the powers that be in Mises like that, and you definitely found out what happens there in a big hurry if you're not towing that line of every position that Mises has. There's definitely a serious inflexibility occurring within that bunch. And I don't even know who's in charge of Mises anymore. Is it still Michael Heiss? I mean, who are the men and women behind the curtain at this point? Is it Angela? I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah, I think it's like Luke at this point, but the general thing, so this is, if Javier Milei is basically forced to play the cards he's dealt as the president of Argentina, do you think, that the president of America could be any different?
Oh, gosh. The president of the United States is powerless, absolutely powerless at this point in history. I think the last president of any real consequence in terms of major policy changes in a country were probably Teddy Roosevelt and to some extent FDR, unfortunately in the progressive vein. Woodrow Wilson, of course, another progressive. Those folks all certainly did a lot to hasten the expansion of the size of the federal government. The federal government used to be, I mean, much smaller than it is today. There's no doubting that. We can talk about the terrible things their military did, how they solved the Indian question out west, and that. So certainly there was always some military might there. But in terms of bureaucracy, I mean, we had a reasonably small bureaucracy until at least the 1880s. Then, of course, Interstate Commerce Act, you started growing government out quite a bit in that vein.
Right.
And even as recently as before, say, like 1913, you didn't. Before 1913, you didn't have a federal income tax. You didn't have the Federal Reserve. The federal government at least, was still at a reasonable size, in my opinion. But once people like Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson got in there and just blew up the size of the government, with the cooperation of Congress and the capitalists at the time certainly saw an opportunity to improve their position with some government helping them out in terms of cementing their positions. So certainly the last 110 years have not been pretty. And certain presidents did play a significant role, but the majority of presidents, they're doing what their staffers tell them. They have to play ball with the Congress, and it doesn't seem to matter which party's in power. They're all into cementing their positions and perpetuating the rackets and corruption. So I've seen no improvements in that trend.
So how do you think, with that framework, that basically the president isn't going to be able to change anything, that we get to a libertarian minarchist world through the political process?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It'd be a very bottom-up approach for certain. I think you'd have to start with libertarians getting elected into the city, township, county type offices, then gradually building up a roster that could then start getting elected to some state level offices, start taking over some states here and there. It's definitely going to have to be a very bottom up thing, because obviously the alternative is outright revolution, violent revolution.
And we would never advocate that.
We had a little bit of a revolution back there in 1776, although that was I guess kind of a minority, really, revolution. It wasn't really the majority of Americans even that participated in that revolution, but there were just enough, and they were able to, of course, later in the war, get the French to intervene, and that sealed the deal for that revolution. But the number of actual people that were on board with that revolution was a minority, no doubt about it.
Well, so the question, though, is, the government is bigger than ever. Like, we've got the single most expansive empire and the single most globally connected set of empires through various hegemonies and alliances and shit that we've ever had. So the question is, the question I have, do you really think that it is possible for even a bottom-up political movement to create a minarchist society?
Well, again, I think it would have to derive from some real serious societal collapse, some very large economic upset, natural disaster. Something's going to have to break. And of course, now you have just the United States alone has managed to put itself $35 trillion into debt. Mm-hmm. I forget what the worldwide figure is, but it's it's got to be pushing, I'm guessing, 80 trillion or something like that in worldwide debt. So you have all this debt out there all across all of these governments. They've been using this unlimited borrowing to basically obtain unlimited power, because money equals power. There's no doubt about that. And because this there's no constraint on this borrowing, although the interest payments are starting to get pretty significant. So if you have something that puts us into high interest rates, you're certainly going to start seeing at least some sort of default going on with these governments. And then that gets interesting. It's like, well, how are you going to force us to pay? We have the nuclear weapons and you don't. So,
Dennis Leary, we got the bombs.
We got that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Great song, by the way.
Yeah.
It talks about me a lot. So anyway, it's just the unlimited borrowing that's out there now. The fact that they're holding nuclear weapons. There's just this unlimited power base that currently exists, but they're continuing in such a self-destructive vein. And every empire has sooner or later had its collapse.
Yeah.
Even the Roman Empire finally got into such a corrupt state that it couldn't maintain itself. So, someday something's going to give. And I guess as much as we can educate people and prepare people for when that time comes to get some kind of a new paradigm, because this can't possibly perpetuate forever. It's just becoming too self-corrupted.
So, but it seems like those two ideas are somewhat at odds, that we're going to need a bottom-up thing through the political process, but the only real way is if there's a significant enough shock to the system that the system collapses and then people can pick up the pieces. Or is this you saying that those are two routes and the one you think is more likely to actually work is the collapse-based model?
Right. So if we do basically collapse back from this big bang that has occurred, if you collapse back, you're going to pretty much naturally end up with decentralized government, because if the larger government basically ceases to exist, then the fallback would be these smaller, say, city-states, counties, whatever
Right.
Level you want to look at. And if you have people already in place with some, leadership, organizational experience that can, pick up at the decentralized level, then you get your decentralized revolution, in a sense.
Right. So here's the question, though. You talk about power vacuums. Do you authentically believe that in a collapse scenario, the default position is going to be coming back to not only a state but a minarchist one? Do you think that the most likely scenario, especially given the current mass populace, is going to be the acceptance of a minarchist state, or will they want to return right back to the sort of paradigm where it was, and just say anything that gets me back to my hungry man sooner, my Budweiser,
Yeah.
Anything that gets me back to my fucking mimosas and Sex in the City, or whatever the chicks are watching these days, anything that gets me back to that as soon as possible, I will do. Do you think that, which do you think is more likely, minarchy or that?
So a lot of these revolutions seem to occur in a poverty situation, where the economy has collapsed and the people are, when you're hungry, you tend to start thinking maybe a little more extreme actions against those who created the situation. What seems to happen quite often when a government does start to collapse, you get the military juntas, basically the army takes over at that point, and the army says, hey, you guys are totally screwed this up, we're taking over. And we've seen that many times,
like Pinochet.
Right? Yeah, throughout our hemisphere. Even we've had all these military juntas. Basically the generals take over and start running things. So that's certainly a distinct possibility. We could end up with a military run country here. Although if people continue to arm themselves, it may be a little more trickier for a military junta to hold power here than it might in some countries.
Unless, of course, because they've got no real ties to the actual soil, they'll just fucking start bombing citizens.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Then the Hunger Games start up. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what happened in so many fucking countries where like the military took over, and if you're interfering with the new regime, you're fucked. They'll blow up your house, they'll fucking poison your water, they'll like rape your women in front of you with dogs in the case of Pinochet, or hire
Yeah.
Nazis to rape your boys and girls in the case of Pinochet, or brutally beat you and crush you or throw you out of helicopters in the case of Pinochet. Anyway, the general so the reason I'm asking all this, I want to know basically how you prevent, especially a country that we can both admit started out on really really anti-freedom terms. The terms of like slavery, genocide, conquest, expansionism, sexism, scapegoating that caused the witch trials, and eventually the Red Scare, which was basically just the modern day witch trials, or the anti-trans panic now, which is the modern day witch trials. Like all of this sort of thing, the same country that created the basis and required the subjugation and oppression of basically everyone, but especially certain minorities that they could otherize and then use as the reason for their regime. Um, do you really think that it's possible to not only reduce that but keep it small, um, like with like the present conditions that we have now? How would you, I guess the follow-up question would be, reduce it to begin with and then keep it small?
Right. And that's a great question because a lot of, through history again, a lot of nations, a lot of kings, they leaned on the whole fabric of the society being a kind of a spiritual based fabric. Here, of course, in the United States, we have that long Christian Judeo tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Thomas Jefferson actually was not a Christian; he was a deist. But there was always this deference to God, and in terms of building the fabric of the society, and creating a set of values, morals. There was always that reliance on some sort of a Christian ethic. To kind of tie things together, love of God, love of country, etc. Of course, as you know, religions have been used to keep people in positions of power throughout history, as we have seen. So we really need to really weave a whole new fabric. I think we need to just develop this big old quilt where you have different people in different regions of the country, coming up with maybe their own value systems, and not so much based on love of state, but love of their community, love of the people around them. And if you can come up with, again, something a little more decentralized, where you don't have the state being your father, your mother, your religion, taking on all of those roles that really communities should be engaging in. So it's really, to me, a matter of building up communities, making those communities strong, independent-minded. You're always going to rely on at least a certain number of people. You can't go completely alone unless you do the Ted Kaczynski thing and build a cabin somewhere. But obviously, folks are not going to leave you alone out there, as Ted found out. So it's certainly it's going to involve a whole new mindset, a whole new paradigm, a whole new approach to how people interact with each other, and how you do government generally.
So, in your hypothetical scenario, people are sort of, for lack of a better term, retrained into being better people. They love each other. They're
Educated.
Yeah, they love each other. They're trying to be there for each other. They're trying to radically and decentrally like plan for things and have a good paradigm, a good social order, or trying to like be communitarian minded and actually solve these problems. Where's the government necessary?
Right, and that's where government, to me, has been the obstacle. Government, Ronald Reagan famously said, and I wish he had lived up to it. Government is the problem. That was the one true thing he said during his illustrious career. Government creates a lot of these problems. Government interferes with a lot of the natural processes of society, tries to replace these natural processes. And that's where all the trouble begins. And then government tries to create a solution to the problem it created. So, it just seems like 99 times out of 100, the problem was created by people that wanted to oppress others, wanted to aggress against others, and they found the perfect conduit through a government agency of some sort to implement that aggression. And people have just got to stop being, so greedy, so power hungry, looking for easy ways to make a living. It's the 7 deadly sins all seem to manifest themselves through government aggression at some point. One of the worst examples, I think, is zoning. I mean, it's none of my fucking business what my neighbor does or what they have on their property, as long as they're not like polluting my groundwater, or they're not harming me or harming my kids. I don't give a fuck what my neighbor does. They can do whatever they want. I just don't feel I have any right to go to a zoning board or to advocate for some zoning ordinance that restricts what people can do with their property. And I think that's a prime example of how government aggression has just totally screwed up our society.
So you're basically...
and then we built freeways through cities, and we totally divided those neighborhoods into all these different zones that had never previously existed, and you just totally destroyed the fabric of those neighborhoods when you built those freeways through there.
So you're basically a YIMBY.
Oh, not in my backyard?
No, a YIMBY.
Well,
yes, in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly. YIMBY. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's not my business if my neighbor wants to put up an amusement park. To me, that's on me. I should have bought a bigger parcel of land and had more of a buffer, and then it wouldn't have mattered what my neighbor put next door. So obviously, some of my solutions or my proposed solutions would be much easier to implement outside of a large city. So I think a solution to a lot of people's problems is getting the hell out of those cities, where you're packed together and become basically this termite hill, where you're just nothing but a termite answering to whatever higher authority in that Borg dictates upon you. So I certainly encourage people to consider a more rural lifestyle. I think that's and if possible, try to look for ways you can produce your own work, self-ownership of as much of your economic activity as possible, because that's just going to naturally require less government interventions. Of course, the government seems to find you no matter where you live anymore, and that's certainly a problem.
So you're on the side of Sonic, and you're trying to escape from the city.
Yes. As far underground as possible if need be.
Yeah. So, all right. This question then. Here's the thing. Do you object if somebody wants to use their property to run a drag queen story hour?
It's their property. And that's a case of, when it comes to, unfortunately, I never had children, but if I had children, there would be certain decisions obviously made within my family about what a child should be learning at a certain age. But if my neighbor wanted to have a drag queen hour, and if those families willingly brought their kids over there, if everything was a voluntary transaction, that's good on them. I have no need to impose my values or religion upon my neighbor.
Gotcha. Yeah, because like the whole, and that's not even getting into like the trans shit, because like that's a whole nother subject. Because one of the key things that people don't even understand about the drag queen story at our issue is they're not trans. These people do not identify as the opposite gender. They use, she, her pronouns as part of the performance. But they're like
Right.
the vast majority of these people are just gay, and they'll tell you that immediately. Some of them are even straight, but they do this as like a cabaret performance, like Tim Curry and
Right.
Rocky Horror Picture Show. Um, so
Oh, excuse me one second, Jeremiah. I've got to jump out for just a second here. I'll be right back. Hey, Missy. I'm on a video call with somebody.
that's fine. So, y'all, fucking intermission, like, share, subscribe. If there's somebody you want on one of these discussion panels, sort of thing, that I do, feel free to hit them up. And if there's somebody you want to have me to have one of these conversations with, also feel free to get us connected. Plenty more where this came from. Um, so the general reason I brought that up, the Chase Oliver situation has libertarians absolutely like cockfighting, and it's so embarrassing in so many ways that I used to help this party that seems so fundamentally disinterested in actual freedom when it comes to people they even slightly disagree with. Um, like the first issue that I see people have, um, that really fucks with me is Chase, like 12 years ago or some shit like that, tweeted some stuff out on an account he doesn't even use anymore. And pissants, like fucking, like all these big ass entertainers in libertarian circles had no problem just like posting all these tweets that he posted and like being like, ah, yeah, see, a decade ago he was saying this. It's literally the fucking Falling in Reverse song, zombified. It's like cancel culture manifest. It's, oh no, they'll never let go of something you said 10 years ago. It's that. It's cancel culture, but they're totally fine with it when they've been bitching about it for 800 years when it happens to a conservative, because it's happening to Chase Oliver, and because it's happening to somebody who's with the wokes. Um, Go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. Or Jeremiah.
It
The
doesn't
thing
matter.
is, it's easy to pretend that you always have this high moral road, that you would never resort to the kind of tricks that the people on the other side have employed over the years. So we're all capable of censorship. Anyone can censor people, cancel people. No one has this monopoly on total virtue. I mean, there's always been dirty political tricks as long as there's been elections. I mean, you look back to some of the elections like back in the 1840s and 1850s, and the things people would say about each other. All this is nothing new. There's always been this negative campaigning, dirty politics, and people always looking for that gotcha moment, that little sound bite. Well, back in 1978, you said this, and it's like, well, you and I know people evolve. People are constantly learning. People are constantly looking to improve their mindset on issues. They're looking to educate themselves. At least the sincere ones are looking to educate themselves and try to expand their mind and learn. There's a lot of folks that are pretty set in their ways at this point in life. Here I am, 56 years old. I'm certainly set in my ways in a few areas, but I do try to understand the other side. I try to understand their perspective, because things generally happen for a reason. There's
Right.
I always like to get into the reason why someone believes a certain way, or why people do the things they do, and what their motives are behind such things. And if people are motivated against the whole concept of trans, of people uh, changing their gender, if they've got their mind set against that, they're going to look to weaponize anything they can find to improve their position, their viewpoint. So it's not always about what's right and what's wrong. It's what their belief system is, and the means justifying the ends. Pretty much anything goes, as long as it's in line with their belief system, and that's a hard thing to combat. It really is.
Yeah. Well, but so let me ask you then, like in terms of combating that, uh, are there any specific people or organizations you have in mind that like are the kinds of people who engage in the kind of behavior you just described, other than HAD, which by the way, if you're watching this, um,
Well, a lot of organized religion, to be honest. I've tried I don't know how many churches in my lifetime, and sooner or later, that some point of contention came up where I couldn't, I was like, well, I could stay in this organization and try to fake it, and say, oh, maybe I'll just kind of ignore some of these beliefs of theirs, and just try to work with them beyond that. But as soon as I get into a situation where I see a lot of intolerance or black and white thinking going on, I just get turned off just so fast to that. And it's such a complex world, and people are so unique and complex. They've had, these millions of minutes of their own personal experiences, their own environment, their own upbringing, their own unique set of interactions. And to try to paint this broad brush across any group of people, it just seems patently unfair. To be honest. So when an organization starts engaging into demonizing certain behaviors, or getting into this good versus evil, I instantly become suspicious of that.
right. So organized religion, like, I mean, and any others that you have in mind? I could list a few. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, and I hate to pick on certain ones, but it seems like a lot of Christian religions lean very heavily on the Old Testament versus the New Testament, and I'm more of a New Testament guy. I'm more into the Gospels and the covenant that was set forward in those, because I mean, in the Old Testament there was some pretty. I mean, there were people being turned into salt. There was massive floods. There was a lot of blood sacrifice going on, and it seems like to me that the New Testament brought on a whole different paradigm, and a whole different a teaching, that of loving your neighbor, loving God, and I've certainly leaned heavily on those teachings. But I think a lot of people stay hung up on a lot of the Old Testament teachings, and they feel that those are still a very basic tenet of Christianity. But I'm just not there. I think that becomes weaponized. I think people will start using certain stories or certain snippets from the Old Testament, and really start demonizing certain behaviors that maybe might want to call them a sin, but are they still like a mortal sin at this point? I question a lot of that.
Yeah, well, it's the reason so one of the things that routinely gets discussed in the space where this stream got planned. You've been there for many of these. Is this particular issue, and like, for instance, Gays Against Groomers, the like just bigot organization that like uses anything at all to make their point, that doesn't even have to do with grooming. A lot of the time, like for instance, they've got this tweet 2 hours ago bitching about Imane Khalif winning boxing gold in the Olympics, claiming she's a biological male with no actual evidence, but it has nothing to do with grooming. They just don't like trans people, and they're willing to take anything against this. Um, and so it's that sort of thing. Um, when you
Yeah, playing upon people's fears seems to be a big tactic. They're always looking to create this boogeyman, or as James Weeks likes to call them, these spooks.
Yeah.
They're always looking to create something that you can target your angst against or be afraid of. And the more you can get someone afraid of something, certainly the more resistant they're going to become to being tolerant of that concept or that person. Yeah, if you can get them afraid of somebody, I mean, you've pretty much won your battle already.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like all you got to do is fucking get people angry. And you can guarantee the rest of your grift to work. Um like the vast majority of these people are willing to just ignore facts. They're willing to pretend certain things aren't facts. They're willing to ignore studies. They're willing to pretend that certain things they're doing are preventing grooming when in fact they encourage it. Like so many people I've heard get very angry with me when I bring up the actual studies that confirm that somehow when you teach kids, when you have comprehensive sex ed, you reduce the instances of grooming because they know what it is. They know that they're allowed to say no, and they know like that it's in fact wrong for the person to proceed after that, and that it's wrong for them to take advantage of their position as an adult to try and fuck a kid. They know these things because they were told these things. You can't get told you can't get the same level of anti-grooming without being told those things. But so many people are just averse to the concept of anybody even talking to their kid about any of this. And that like it's that kind of mentality that pervades this stuff. And it's not just trans people. It's also like, be afraid of blacks, they're criminals, or immigrants, they're criminals, or
Oh, I was about to bring up immigrants,
yeah.
absolutely, because you keep seeing, well, especially if you turn on your Fox News, there's always these stories about how some immigrant raped somebody or killed somebody, and it's like, okay, you found one immigrant out of how many thousands of immigrants that did something bad? I mean, it's silly to be using pick out like one person out of a population of 10,000 people and make them the poster child for immigration. I mean, that's just, to me, that's the oldest trick in the book, is to, just cherry pick certain segments of a population and then just turn around and demonize the whole population. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, well, I hate to say it, but that's the kind of stuff the Nazis used to do in their propaganda. They just had to find this one example or create this one false flag, and they could demonize this entire group of people. I mean, it's just horrific, some of the stuff you see.
Yeah, and it's a good thing you were the first one to say that, because normally I am. Um, but like the Nazis, literally, one of the first things they did after declaring a bunch of stuff degenerative, like art, certain forms of literature, dance, etc. What they did, like, because of Mein Kampf, which, if anybody ever wants to read a delusional pamphlet, that would be it, because a significant amount of it is just like, I don't like syphilis. Do you like syphilis? Jews. Queers.
Right.
Syphilis. I'll juxtapose these two and consistently, like, claim that they're the cause of those. And so this Jewish degenerative culture invaded our precious Germany, and it took our women and gave us syphilis, and that's why we have to stop jazz. And it's that mentality that like pervades so much of this. And some of the first things that the Nazis did was burn trans research. Like, burn the research that
Yep.
actually proves it scientifically valid. And then, just real quick, because this pisses me off when people bring this up and they don't clearly have a clue what they're fucking talking about. They're like, oh, but what was in that research? What were the books that they burned? And they pretend that Hirschfeld was some pedophile. Well, the reason they do that is because some research that talked about the sexual habits of minors, which sounds bad, but the research was asking adults what their habits were when they were minors. It was never probing a bunch of kids being like, hey, how you fuck? It was never that.
Right.
But, like, they wanted to
Yeah.
pretend it was some terrible thing, and they don't care about facts or reality. They just, they like the books getting burned because they would burn the books too.
Well, and the scariest thought of all, and I try to remind people of this as often as I can, but Adolf Hitler was elected. I mean, it wasn't just he tried the revolution route, but he got his ass kicked on that one. So he started going the electoral route, and every election they'd get a few more votes, and then he finally got himself elected. So the people of Germany brought that upon themselves. They just, I don't know if they didn't do their homework or they were just so desperate for a new solution from all of their economic woes that's what they turned to. So,
Yeah.
And of course, the Nazis and communists, they were battling it out in the streets for years there as part of that power struggle. But Hitler was elected.
Yeah. And, like, the other half that people don't like to talk about is, and this is something super frustrating that people forget. Hitler was populist because he had broad-based appeal. He was popular and populist because he appealed to both certain people in the left and certain people in the right. The whole Ernst Röhm situation, for anybody who doesn't know, Ernst Röhm was basically the leader of the left wing of the National Socialists, the socialist part of it. And, like, when it came down to it, when Ernst Röhm started to be like, well, yeah, but weren't we going to start liberating people and, like, bringing them away from this, like, capitalist paradigm that is run by international Jewry that was going to exploit us and, you know, drive Germans out of Germany? And weren't we going to do
our
something?
name does have the word socialist in it, you know.
Yeah.
So when are we going to do the socialist stuff, you know?
And then Hitler was like, and he killed them. He killed all of them in the Night of the Long Knives. He just fucking purged them, and, like, he slaughtered Rome. He destroyed the left wing of the Nazis, and he fucking, like, drove them out because the military was affiliated with the capitalists. It was a very industrial complex sort of government. That's the reason Germany is so highly fucking connected to industry and rhetoric and culture and because the Germans were industrialists. The German, like, state, the military, it was all industrialized. And so when the choice came down to Ernst Röhm and the left wing of the Nazi party and the military, he needed to flex his power and actually, like, do what he wanted to do. He was like, sorry, you served your purpose. I don't need you anymore.
Hitler was a master of tailoring his message to his audience. When he
Exactly.
went to talk to Krupp and the other industrialists, he was like, hey, I'm planning on building a whole bunch of stuff here, guys, and I plan on showing you a whole lot of contracts and business here. And yeah, he knew who was going to be buttering his bread, and yeah, he absolutely would tailor his message to whoever he was dealing with at that time, like any good populist would, of course.
Yeah, and of course working with anyone in the West who would work with him. Like, I've got an article for Free Thought Project, like, that's still up there saying, like, all the businesses from America alone that were working
Oh,
with
Henry
like,
Ford.
yeah,
Him and Henry Ford, man, they was tight. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and Bush, Prescott Bush, the like
Yep.
grandfather of Bush Jr., the father of Bush Sr., the guy who got Prescott or who got George H.W. into the CIA, the guy who provided the economic wherewithal for the Bush family fortune to put George Bush Jr., George W. into power, like that motherfucker was helping the Nazis get, steal, and hide their money, and like IBM, and fucking Coca-Cola made an entirely new soda so that they could still sell it in Germany, and you know, fucking so many companies that I could list, like fucking Chase, like JP Morgan Chase now, but Chase at the time was working with the Nazis to not only help them hide but multiply their money so that they would have more funds to, you know, commit genocide. And all of this shit, like, then the U.S. government helps the Nazis rehabilitate themselves. The first iteration of NATO gets like an ex-Wehrmacht organization called the Bundeswehr, and that's still around. But people don't know that the people who originally headed that up were Nazis, who were head commanders in Nazi Germany, but they were so sorry, you know, and they forget
Well, the
about.
thing is, yeah, people get after me when I start throwing the word fascism around, but fascism is alive and well. It's
Yes,
it's a proven model, and it's continues to thrive to this day. Fascism definitely gets things accomplished. It builds huge militaries, and people still vote for it to this day, and not even knowing just how fascist of a world they live in.
exactly. And like it's not even just that, like the CIA helped Reinhard Gehlen and the Gehlen organization ratline a bunch of Nazis out of Germany. Um, and they helped him do this so that he could spy on the Russians for them, because he
Yep.
knew how to spy on the Russians already, so he might as well use that. And like this Galen organization helped a guy whose name escapes me absolutely currently, but I'll probably remember it before we're done with this. This guy who would literally run the Colonia Dignidad for Pinochet, the place where so many like women and children were raped, and where men were tortured, and where like so much of this shit happened. That guy was a Nazi, the guy who ran that place, and Pinochet had him under his employ. So it's no surprise to me that the libertarians who are sympathetic to Pinochet are also sympathetic to Nazis and their consistent bullshit. Um, but like the general, like, so they did that. They did the MK Ultra programs, had a whole lot of Nazi scientists. NASA obviously had Nazi scientists. There's a whole song about that. Like the general, yeah, Werner von Braun. The whole idea, I think, should be to remember all this stuff and remember that the modern day version of that is being carried out. You've got fears of disease and drugs and sloth and um, sexual degeneracy, and it's happening
Whole new
again.
set of
What?
absolutely. A
Yeah,
whole new set of boogeymen. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. Well, it's kinda, but also sort of just the same. Like it's just over here now, and also in any European country which still identifies as Europa. I hate that shit. You're not Europa. You're fucking just some white dude in a trailer in Tennessee. Shut the fuck up. Um, it's
Right.
that mentality. It's the mentality that has like SPQR fucking profile pictures or like a marble statue. And it's telling you that the best way to like get forward is to, like fucking reject all joys and, fucking get a Gab account and fucking like like drink a lot. There's this like guy named Art of Creation on Twitter, and one of the things that he's really, really super specific about was like he fucking says that the stoner societies are still living in mud huts, but alcoholic societies are like Rome and Greece, and yeah, but they also fell, you cunt.
Yeah, not a good example.
So it's like
Not the best example.
yeah, and it's like the whole so the culture, like the modern culture, is still the same kinds of culture. You know, it's all the same. We still have the same bullshit that we're dealing with. It's meet the old boss, new boss, same as the old boss. It's that same shit again. And so many people don't recognize that. They would rather that their conservative heroes just be allowed to keep bashing them wokes. And so often what that amounts to is just like I fucking insulted a college student on a campus with a table or some shit like that, or like I had an event and some liberal had the mic for a second and I really showed them, you know, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Michael Knowles, that kind of mentality is just, it's just such an anti-discussion, anti-reason mentality that's cropping up and becoming very popular these days.
And do you subscribe to the opinion that it's all just meant to be a big distraction to distract us from the true authoritarianism that's going on?
Oh yeah, well it's not just that, like, because it's definitely that. Like, all these fucking rightoids like to complain about dark money and, you know, and say that Bill Gates is funding the liberal message and shit like that. And he is, to be clear. Bill Gates has this incestuous relationship between NPR, PBS, factcheck.org, and like his particular corporations, where because he funds the institution that backs things like NPR and PBS, and since factcheck.org is also funded by the same people, and since those people will always side with him because he funds those people, like when it comes down to it, it's like you can tell like they're never gonna say something too critical of Bill Gates. They're gonna fucking they're gonna treat him with kid gloves. So like when it comes down to it, it is true Bill Gates is funding a message, but what you've also got is oil money. You've got the Koch brothers historically, and currently only one of them because the other one croaked. Like big oil money, and Fred Koch also worked with the Nazis. He had their biggest oil refinery, so the basic gist of Koch brothers money is Nazi like in root. It's just fash money. And so the organizations they support, including the Heritage Foundation behind Project 2025, including the like the Center for American Progress, I think it is, the like Reason Foundation, the so many others, they're Koch money, and like they filter money to all these student organizations so that the students can be brought up in the ways of like right libertarian thought, and like whatever conservative happens to be close enough to right libertarian thought that they can, you know, jibe with it. And also the Wilks from Daily Wire, like the Wilks are also fracking oil money. They're oil money people, and they're funding things like Daily Wire and PragerU. And so it's like so many of these organizations are just like, yeah, we're oil billionaires. We're going to make the case that capitalism is good so that you don't give up on the thing that's making us large amounts of money. And anything that gets away in the way of that is part of the woke agenda, and it has to be stopped.
Yeah, so the corporations have definitely looked to use government as that lever to just continually enrich themselves. Many years ago, I think my mother would have been a libertarian if she had even known about them back in the day. But I remember her saying specifically about how war, for example, was a racket. and how the wars were basically created by the wealthy to make themselves wealthier. And and that sentiment of hers has always stuck with me, and I just see more confirmation of it with every industry I look into, with their relationships with government, with the political candidates they're supporting. I mean, like, look at Barack Obama, for example. Barack Obama, I think some of his biggest donors came off of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And here he's supposed to be, Mr. Progressive, Mr. Anti-economy. Barack Obama is going to ruin the world as we know it. And all the while, he's taking money right from people like Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
I mean, these people are all bought and paid for, and it's just a cruel joke upon all of us when they start just throwing out these ridiculous claims about the politics of these individuals, when these individuals are all corporate funded. So really, it just seems it's all just a big show. Frank Zappa once said, basically, politics is the entertainment division of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that to a greater extent than ever, especially the amounts of dark money alone should be cluing people in that this has just become a complete farce at this point. None of these elections appear to matter at this point, especially when you have only the two political parties and the billions of dollars that are funneling into them from these corporations.
Yeah, well, and so, like, the reason that I'm, I think that it's not only a distraction, but I think it's inherent to the system. When I went to school, I don't know how it was when you were coming up, but like when I went to school, they treated me like dog shit. And one of the ways that they did was, if a fight started, it was my fault. Even if I could prove the fight started, the fact that I got involved in the fight at all, it was my fault. Of course it was my fault. If I fought back, it was even worse. If I, and so it was that. And in the classroom, they encouraged an environment of, like, groupthink, like collective punishment nonsense, where, like, the common if somebody did something wrong, everybody had to pay for it. So basically, it encouraged everybody to control the person who might stick out. And this mentality, I think, jibes well with the church, who always has somebody to point out, whether in the crowd or out in public, to say that those are the people who are following the ways of demons. Or, in the case of atheists, you've got a massive problem in various scientific communities where, they're largely disjoint from actual science, and will oftentimes just treat it as some sort of religious ritual with, like, saints, like Anthony Fauci, for instance. And they'll publicly jump down the throat of the latest scapegoat. They'll say that if you didn't wear a mask, you killed grandma and you deserve to die. It's that sort of mentality that I think pervades a lot of this stuff. And so it's no surprise to me that certain people will then pick on the immigrant or the queer or the bad religion, the Wiccan, the whatever. There's always some new satanic panic. There's always some new Red Scare. There's always some new, like, commie or, fucking degenerate to fight. Degenerate. Like, the general thing is, like, there's always got to be somebody that you can point at. And speaking of that, by the way, Autumn Chan in chat says the German courts could have sentenced Hitler to death for trying to overthrow the government, but they didn't. Yeah. And also, Hody and Kareem, hello, says, love to hear libertarians discussing culture. So, that's, when it comes down to it, my goal is to point that out, because I think it's necessary. I think it keeps us policing each other, uh, traffic, our jobs, the news media, advertisements, um, fucking social media is a disease. And so many of these other things are just over here telling us, it's like that. It's like that Rage Against the Machine line. Look at what the billboards say: "Come and play, come and play. Forget about the movement." It's that. They want to keep us so focused on attacking the latest boogeyman that we don't remember that the single deadliest threat is these motherfuckers. That the single worst entity for children is these motherfuckers. Like, there are so many more cops who have abused children sexually than there are drag queens. It's not even close. There's a tag on Twitter you can look up called hashtag not a drag queen. And you can see so many examples of people who aren't drag queens, aren't trans, but they did fuck a kid or try to, or they exchanged child porn or something, and a lot of those motherfuckers are cops. Most of them are straight white dudes. It's not LGBT people for the vast majority of the case, but the conservatives really want you to think it is. Meanwhile, they support somebody like Matt Walsh, who says that it's okay to fucking impregnate a 16-year-old because she's an adult. And it's like, or Nick Fuentes, who wants like a pristine, untouched 15-year-old, innocent, or like H. Pearl Davis, who says that the 16-year-olds are hotter than 26-year-olds. These are your anti-grooming heroes. Or Andrew Tate, who literally helped Tristan Tate fuck a 17-year-old and trafficked a 17-year-old after he met her when she was 15 and established a romantic relationship so that he could use her as the bottom bitch in his sex trafficking ring. These are the people who are overwhelmingly in charge of conservative culture now, and they're telling me about grooming? It's just such
definitely crazy stuff, Jeremiah. And we certainly live in a world filled with hypocrisy, filled with a lot of false prophets out there. They're everywhere. And something you touched on earlier was like our upbringing, our public schools, our various churches. They certainly try to teach you conformity. To form your letters in a certain way, to do your mathematics in a certain way, to learn your history in a certain way, to sit in these perfect little rows, to say your Pledge of Allegiance, and it's so much about conformity. And our public schools are definitely they're definitely based upon the Prussian model, where I think that's where the very first serious attempts were made to really instill a whole culture of conformity within those young students, and that of course migrated over into our public schools as well. So I always encourage people, if they have any possible means to do so, that get their kids the hell out of public schools, either homeschool them, see if you can get them into some sort of a private situation, because it's just the amount of mind control that occurs in a lot of these institutions, and it just normalizes certain behaviors. It really saps your critical thinking, and it makes you susceptible to all of these stereotypes, all these boogeymen, and it's definitely something that it took me a long time to break out of that mold myself. So I can appreciate the struggle on anybody's part in that regard, because it's been just beat into us for so many years.
Yeah, and like you can't swing too opposite either, like, because here's the thing, like, by that I'm not saying don't swing the opposite of intolerance. I'm definitely swing the opposite of that, but you can't just become the new boss in that way either. Like, there are so many examples of conformity and groupthink in more woke and left cultures as well. You know, like, and there's a certain tendency among these people to be insular, understandably, because of how they were treated. But if you let that turn you into a piece of shit, people are still going to walk away from you. There's going to be a certain amount of, I don't fucking care. You know, you treated me poorly, so why should I care if you were treated poorly, if all you're going to do is transfer that on down the line, you know? So it's one of those things, like, you know, or it's okay when we do it. Like, these Democrats who were totally opposed to any sort of Russian interference, but Share Blue was totally okay. It was totally okay to influence, like, fucking, like, your own particular uh, set of politics in a very similar, like, information controlling way, um, as your opponents did when you called it Russian and election interference and collusion. So there's a certain element of it, and I've known some people in some certain circles who have used their LGBT status as a cudgel, as a way to sort of, like, muscle their way through a conversation rather than actually, you know, engaging with the other person. That shouldn't be done either. But those people overwhelmingly don't have the power. So I still kind of focus on the ones who do. I focus on the ones who have, like, the actual institutional authority, the ones who are making a shit ton of laws right now and shit. And, like, the ones who follow in the tradition of the age-old Nazis that were exported from Germany and forgiven basically en masse by the world. It's like, we can't repeat the mistakes of history, and I think so many elements of culture are just doing that. Like, the Mises Caucus is just a very small example of that in terms of libertarians, where they're just like, yeah, you know what? Fuck immigrants, fuck trans people. We're just gonna keep, like, we're gonna appeal to the populace and say that, like, you know, it's okay to, like, tell black people to go back to Africa and all this shit, like, you know, basically turning into the party of Jeremy Kaufman. And it's atrocious what's happening. It's atrocious what's happening there and in so many other places. Because, like, the Libertarian Party has a real chance to maybe do something interesting for once with Chase, but instead, so many people were pissed off that they're, like, let's just be clear, unapproachable, like, candidate lost. And, like, I get it. It wasn't exactly the most kosher process to get rid of Rechtenwald, but he also wasn't the most kosher person to begin with. That's why his campaign manager is Lori Price, who literally runs a pro-Putin and pro-Trump bootlicking rag called Legit Gov, which, if you go to that website, you'll find nothing but poor Trump. Oh, Trump, he's such a good Trump. And then Putin is liberating, like, elements of Ukraine. He's such a great leader. And, you know, fucking, this is who Rechtenwald put in charge of his fucking campaign. And so it's one of those things. It's one of those things where he lost because he lost. And because maybe people don't want a weird lizard who can't say more than 2 words without fucking licking something. Yeah, you're very familiar. You've seen it. He's weird, yo. And it's like, this is the vibe you wanted to go with. No wonder people didn't pick that.
Yeah, so I guess one of the larger themes I'm taking away from this is, if you're going to portray yourself as being a more principled option, as a morally, possibly a better approach to life in general, not just your political choices, if you're trying to promote a whole different paradigm for a society, and one based on fairness, morality, and non-aggression, then you have to live by those principles yourself. You have to have show a clear set of values. You have to show a set of values that's going to appeal to the majority of people. You have to be principled yourself. You can't just go off and start targeting people randomly just because they might, believe differently from you on a certain issue or two. And these folks that are like one-issue voters or two-issue voters, I think they're screwing themselves. I think they really need to expand their minds a little more and think about the larger picture of what this government is doing to us, and how are we going to, combat this, and how are we going to come out a freer society down the road. You got to think long term, and you got to think large picture on a lot more of these issues.
Yeah, and see, I'm an anarchist. I know you aren't, although give it time, we'll get there.
It's tempting.
Yeah, and you could still be an anarchist and involved in politics. There's so many examples, but the general thing is fucking. When it comes down to it, Chase had really good positions. Ending the Fed, ending three-letter agencies, opposing basically all gun control, ending the war on drugs, making it easier for people to immigrate, but do so in a way that benefits the economy and shit like that. I'm not a Chase supporter. I'm an anti-voting anarchist asshole over here, but I can read, which sets me apart from a significant amount of libertarians who liked Javier Milei because they didn't read his platform to find out how fucking evil it was, who didn't read any of the statements after he was elected, just saw a funny line go slightly down, and were like, and I read Chase's platform. It seems reasonable, even from a right libertarian perspective. He's checking a lot of their boxes, and for some reason people are still jacking off about how terrible he is, mostly because of shit he didn't even say, or because of things that they misconstrued, or because he said it like a decade ago. Well, shut the fuck up. If a decade ago is where we're going, Rechtenwald needed to be jettisoned. He was a piece of shit.
Yeah, Rechtenwald was not a strong candidate in my opinion, and some of the behavior does come across as sore loser style of behavior. I can't disagree with that one.
Yeah, and so the reason I'm bringing all that up, I think, and this is, we're coming up on 2 hours. The torture will stop soon. But I feel like if you want to ask a question do you think this is a distraction? Fuck yeah, I do. We've got limited time, energy, and everything else. We got limited life. And they want us to spend as much of that limited everything fighting each other, pointing our barrels at each other so that we can never point them upward to the ivory towers.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm basically gonna leave you with the final word. You can take as long as you need. We've got about 7 minutes, I'm thinking. Because that's exactly what I think. A lot of this culture stuff, this stuff that they want to divide us on based on culture, is the same kind of divide and conquer stuff that they did in order to cement what was in Nazi Germany. And I don't want it to fucking happen again. So
yeah, so I don't know if I'll take 7 minutes, but again, I think back to 1930s Germany, and they started really looking at different groups of people. They were really pushing the racial purity angle, and they were looking at everything. They were talking about the gypsies, the Jews, folks that had mental impairments, folks that had certain physical impairments. And, this all became about, this ideal of a master race that would perpetuate the new Reich. And we'd have this unstoppable nation that would be the envy of the world. And you see some parallels with what some of the modern day politicians are putting out there, and it's quite frightening. Obviously, neither side is very well behaved at times. Some folks on the left certainly can get carried away with certain concepts. The old line about pushing grandma off the cliff if you take away too much of her Medicare, Medicaid. So you see a lot of those tactics throughout the political spectrum. But when you start getting on this nationalist kick, and you start talking about immigrants somehow being detrimental, well, here's the news flash. I mean, two of my grandparents were immigrants, and then the rest of my grandparents, their parents were all immigrants. It's immigrants that got this country to the point it is today. I mean, it's immigrants that built all these roads. It's immigrants that built all these industries. It's immigrants that made all these scientific discoveries. And of course, I mean, we're all immigrants. I mean, the people that were here first were the Native Americans. I mean, so this kick about picking on immigrants generally, I mean, obviously, people are looking for at least some sort of a immigration process, a documentation process, and Chase himself has advocated for a return to the Ellis Island model of immigration, where whoever wants to come and we'll document you, and we'll let you go off and get a job and start a family and do all the cool things that you wanted to do with your life. So immigration is not a bad thing. Immigration it makes makes our communities more diverse, makes them stronger, brings in new talents, brings in new ways of thinking. There's no negatives to immigration. Obviously, there's always the fear put out that, oh, they're going to take our jobs. And it's like, no, the immigrants usually take the crappiest, lowest paying jobs out there and work their way up. As it just should be a natural process involved there. Certainly shouldn't be any quotas. I mean, quotas, that's as racist as it gets. That's going back to the Chinese Exclusion Acts, that sort of mindset. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we need to get away with that. I mean, get away from that completely. And so that was my final thought there.
Yeah. Well, I think a relatively productive conversation. And before we walk, any projects you're involved in that you want to plug, anything that you want to say, feel free. Go for it.
All right. Well, of course, I currently chair the Straits Area Libertarian Party. So anyone up here in northern Michigan can look that up on Facebook. Easy to find, Straits Area Libertarian Party. And of course, I am once again running for county commissioner in my area. So if you go to Facebook and Andy, the number 4 Liberty, you'll land on that page as well. And I thank you for that.
All right. So I guess final thoughts. Understand that you are being pitted against your neighbor, against people at this level, so that you never look up. And recognize that the real culture war is being fought not down here, not in your neighborhood, but in the highest echelons of the oldest power, in the most expansive states that we've ever seen. And if we don't recognize that now, there's a very strong likelihood that we will never be able to get their power lessened in time for them to not cause the literal fucking apocalypse. And right now we're starting to see that. We're starting to see surveillance states crop up everywhere. We're starting to see the universalization of the worst possible machinations. We're starting to see the rise of fascism yet again. And if we don't stop it now, if we can't say anything now, is not going to be any different to Nazi Germany. And so many people now are accurately calling what's happening in Israel a genocide and comparing it to the Holocaust. Great. Good for you. That's also the same kind of culture that we have here. That's the reason this government is so buddy-buddy with those people. So recognize the actual problems and divorce from all of it, or you're not any better. Actually, like, start to solve these problems. And build your parallel societies, because whether or not you get Andy's version of, like, minarchist society, or whether you get my anarchist version of it, you still need to know the skills. You still need to have the preparedness. You still need to know your neighbors and be on good terms with people. You still need to build your actual society, because anything else is just a way to get exploited when the time comes. So, with all that being said, know your real enemy and smash the fucking state. Thanks for coming on, Andy.
Thank you, my friend, and have a great night there.
You as well.